The fastest land animal is dying a slow death in India. One after the other, cheetahs at the Kuno National Park are dying. Today, the death of another female, Dhatri, was reported. Dhatri, Suraj, Tejas, Uday, Sash, Daksha, and 3 little cubs were all brought to India to save the cheetah. Tragically, they themselves could not be saved. 9 cheetahs have died at the Kuno National Park in the last 5 months. Dehydration, squabbles, severe heat, and maggot bites have all been cited as the reasons for the fatalities. The ambitious project Cheetah aims to re-establish the species within its historical range in the country. The elegant cat was declared extinct in India back in 1952, and the project hopes to benefit global cheetah conservation efforts. The Supreme Court has pulled up the centre, asking it why the government cannot rise above prestige and move the cheetahs to a different location. The government, meanwhile, insists that this is expected and that 50% mortality is what usually happens in such cases. In their affidavit in the Supreme Court, the centre has stated that the deaths are troubling but not duly alarming. On the other hand, a group of foreign experts from South Africa and Namibia, who are all part of the Cheetah Project Steering Committee, have written a letter to the Supreme Court highlighting how their opinions were being ignored. They've also raised serious concerns over the project's management. As usual, politics over the cheetah deaths has already begun. Former Environment Minister and Congress MP Jairam Ramesh slammed the government on Twitter, saying, and I quote him, "This is what happens when science and transparency take a back seat. This is what happens when one man's vanity and desperate need for self-glory takes over." Unquote. Today, only about 7,000 to 8,000 cheetahs remain all over the world. With a species as vulnerable as the cheetah, can we afford to lose them? Why are these deaths happening? And what's the way forward? Let me take this to my guests tonight. I'm joined by Arjun Gopalaswamy, founder and chief scientist of Carnassiais Global, and Ajay Suri, wildlife expert and wildlife filmmaker, also joins us, as well as Dr. Prayag HS, currently the chief veterinary officer in the government of Karnataka, has also joined us. Welcome, gentlemen. Of course, later on the show, I'll also be joined by Dr. Laurie Marker, who is the executive director of Namibia's Cheetah Conservation Fund. All right, first to you, Arjun. This, of course, is a very concerning situation. We are seeing death after death of the cheetahs that have been translocated. The government is saying that this was expected. Was this expected? As somebody who has, been a wildlife expert, help us understand, first of all, when such a translocation happens, an intercontinental translocation, is this kind of a situation expected?
Okay. Thank you, Shreya, for having me on. To answer your question on the mortality rates in general, we should just bring to perspective here all the deaths, most of the deaths, 6 out of the 8 deaths that have happened within India have all happened within enclosures. So usually the expectation is like when you move animals, you do expect 1 or 2 due to the stress of moving. And this is like, if you just read the literature, this is what it says. But the known problems that some of us kind of had expressed before this project even begun, or before the translocations actually begun, have not been met yet, because all of these are now due to sort of unforeseen circumstances in some ways, because they have all occurred within the enclosures. But we should expect a much larger proportion of deaths to occur outside the enclosures when they actually are out in the wild. So that's where the real challenge is. It's quite unfortunate that we've had such a large number of deaths when the project has barely begun, has not even begun effectively, because all the cheetahs are now back within the enclosures.
Okay, Ajay Suri, I want to take this to you. This was a project which was grand, which was, big in terms of the aims that it sets out with. It aims to resurrect the cheetah species, one which has been declared extinct back in 1952 in India. I'm sure when this was planned and implemented, everything was taken into consideration. The kind of environment that cheetahs need, the kind of adjustments that the animal would need once it is translocated. All of these points were taken into consideration. Why then are we seeing these deaths?
Of course, all these points were taken into consideration. A lot of studies were done. Dr. Jhala himself, the eminent scientist, Dr. Jhala, wildlife scientist, he was at the helm of the affairs. But I'll tell you what, all these deaths may raise a concern, but I personally do not feel that it's a doomsday scenario. Because, if you talk to impartial cheetah experts, not the interested parties, which we are saying now, people who are moving to Supreme Court, the habitual naysayers, people who, even the Indian wildlife experts, coffee table book writers, who for the last couple of months had been dead against translocation of cheetahs. If you talk to them, if you don't talk to them, if you just go through the data, scientific data which is available, and if you talk to other experts, they will tell you, and they have been telling me, that these deaths are within permissible range. In the wild, as much as 8 out of 10 cheetah cubs perish. So, and as much as 6 to 7 cheetahs out of 10, they die. So I agree that, these things are, causing a lot of concern. But the bigger thing which has come now is, earlier we had our own, body of people in India who were dead against the translocation, and now we are seeing, some members of the committee who are all South Africans. They have written to the Supreme Court, and it is what has happened is that it has become much more than a skirmish. I can say that I have been talking to a lot of other people, a lot of other experts also. I just, recently I interviewed Dr. Rajesh Gopal, who is the chairman of the steering committee, 11-member steering committee, which the government of India has formed. And he told me, look, you should not expect instant results. It's not that the relocation would be completed and it should be termed as a success in just next, 10 days or 10 weeks. It's a long process, mainly because the cheetahs which have been brought to India, they have been going through, altered psychology. The terrain of Africa is so different from the geographical terrain of India. The prey base in Africa is so different from what is in India. And that cheetahs will take some time. And there's a thing called sight fidelity, which is like, it's like a homing instinct. Which is there in all animals and birds, and it would take some time for these cheetahs to come over these obstacles and finally accept India as their new home. And this, according to Dr. Gopal,
so Ajay Suri, how much time do the cheetahs take to adjust in the new environment?
Yeah.
How much time do the cheetahs take to readjust in their new environment?
Yeah.
And I also, okay. I also would request you to explain to us, I've been hearing this concept of communication network. What does that mean? Help us understand that, and how much time, how much duration do cheetahs take to establish that?
First of all, no scientific study as such on cheetahs has been done in India. I think the only study was done after the Supreme Court allowed cheetahs to be brought to India. But what I believe is that cheetahs would take a few years to, this is again quoting Dr. Gopal, who's the chairman of the 11-member committee, that they would take a few years to acclimatize themselves to the Indian terrain, to the new the kind of different forests which India has from Africa, the kind of different prey animals which we have in India. This will not happen in a few months or years, and it might take more than 10 years. Now, this may seem like infinity to many, because in today's age, most of us we expect speedy results. That things should start, or they should be seen to start moving within weeks or months. But this is not going to happen, because here we are talking about the translocation of a species. And don't forget, cheetahs have been in India for last 1,000 years. But they've been absent for last 60, 70 years. So that's time gap, even if it's a small gap. So the cheetahs from Africa, they would need some time to readjust themselves to India, and according to Dr. Gopal and other experts, it will take years, many years, not just a few months or one or 2 years.
Okay, Dr. Prayag, you're a veterinary doctor yourself. Help us understand. There have been lots of reasons that have been cited by the government as to why these deaths are happening. Whether it's severe dehydration, heat conditions, squabbles, of course, maggot infections as well, and there's also been a concern of radio collars adding to the infections that the cheetahs are falling prey to. How much of that is factual, can be trusted that these are the reasons of the deaths? And how much of actually, in the most genuine cases, do cheetahs take time and get adjusted in terms of, the medical conditions that the animal goes through?
Yeah, thank you for taking me on the panel. So I was just going a few days back when cheetahs started dying, the disease risk analysis for entry of a cheetah to India. It's a good document, and I was going through, and they mentioned all the possible disease which cheetah can have. I would like to quote here, when Jairam Ramesh first wanted the cheetahs, I was fortunate enough to get those cheetah from Johannesburg to Mysore Zoo. So before that, whenever I'm assigned a project, I go through that animal entire thing which is available on literature. I speak to expert. That time I was warned that don't bring cheetahs to India because they have a genetic bottleneck and they suffer from a lot of things, and Smithsonian people only told you couldn't breed it. But since it's a policy matter, I didn't have much say, though I raised this issue that, sir, I'm in communication with the Western counterparts. It's not a good idea to bring cheetahs. But since just they told do it. So once we got cheetah, I'm telling my own experience. So they were kept in a quarantine for a long time. And next day when we opened thing, we found a lot of ticks, mites in 770 grams. So that way we got cheetahs to India first time from Johannesburg. Later on, I kept on telling, I told you study the cheetahs. It was an experiment for us, we studied. Later, they told, you told cheetah will not breed, but thankfully, Mysore Zoo was the first zoo in the country to have bred cheetahs. Then all made fun of me, like you told they don't want to breed. I told wait. So success takes its own sweet time and don't be so complacent. So later, all the cheetahs started dying one by one. And they had an expert committee. They got people from all the part of this one, and they couldn't even identify why they died. So later, what we probably came to a understanding was they suffered from a rare genetic disorder called Valerian disease. Unfortunately, that Valerian disease is missing from the document which is being submitted, disease risk analysis for introduction of cheetahs into India. So since those reports are not in the public domain, so it will be foolish of me to comment that this has happened, this has happened. We should always, as a scientific community, as a scientific student, we should have a document to go through that and then comment on it. So what I see in the whole scenario is any project or any system which follows art administration is accountability, responsibility, transparency. So how many people have the report of a post-mortem of cheetahs? I don't know. If that is put in the public domain, then we can comment on that. So whereas I'm very grateful in Mysore Zoo case, everything was put in the expert committee, nothing was done. Thankfully, I had a great boss, B.P. Ravi sir, who told, let the truth come out. Because we are doctors, we are not gods. So we did everything possible. We got an expert who had served in Australia, Dr. Pampapati. They went through everything. We got expert from this one. Finally, it was not resolved. So thankfully, it came to understand that we're not going to breed cheetahs anymore in the zoo condition. Again, when the cheetahs were bought, we were like, open, okay, science is all about experimenting, and experimenters they're doing like, I've heard both groups for and against. As a science student, we take a middle ground and observe. The best part of any science experiment is keep observing it. I've heard the pros of that and against of that. As a doctor, my only concern is give us the scientific proof. Any postmortem happens, you should go through a proper procedure, there should be protocol, and that should be brought in a forum and discussed and accepted. First of all, we should accept it. If the fault has happened, the point is accept the fault has happened.
Okay.
Then you can rectify. Now, what I see is you're not even allowing to accept what has happened. My only humble request to the system is put it on the public domain and take everyone into confidence and discuss about it, and let it be not a one-man show. It will be a collective thing, and think about it. I was reading this book, beautiful book called Our Iceberg is Melting. Something like this happens.
Okay,
Like
fair
the
enough.
penguin tells warns. The 8 penguins will not listen to it unless the catastrophe happens. So we should have the angle of it's
Arjun
not who is right,
Gopalaswamy.
who is wrong. It's what is right, what is wrong.
Okay. All right. All right. Arjun, you have been against bringing the cheetahs to India itself. You've also published an article on this. Introducing African cheetahs to India is an ill-advised conservation attempt, where you also suggest that if you must at all bring cheetahs to India, you should have a revised action plan, which is which has a fully scientific approach to it. One, why do you say that? Two, you also talk about the free-ranging and fenced-in difference between India and Africa. For the benefit of our viewers, help us understand, simplify these two things for us and how it is applied and implemented in the Indian context, and what it means in the context of the deaths of the cheetahs that are happening now.
Okay, so in that article, essentially, we make the point that the India's experiment here, this Project Cheetah, was to do with free-ranging cheetahs, just the way tigers and lions or leopards live in India. They are allowed to move where they wish. They disperse from one population to another. We just allow free movement. In South Africa, I must point, this is not all of Africa, but in South Africa, they do have free-ranging cheetahs. They also do have cheetahs within very, very large fenced areas, about 15,000 square kilometers or much larger even. And they have these fenced-in cheetahs which are like within electrical fences, sizes ranging from as small as 30 square kilometers to up to 1,000 square kilometers. It is this category of cheetahs that are being translocated to India. The argument being that in this category, they have been able to achieve fairly good numbers, and they are ready for translocation anywhere else because there's nowhere else that they can go to. So that's the argument put forth in the project. So but the problem is, the moment we think about free-ranging cheetahs, they occur at very, very low densities. So if you look across Africa, and I have studied the cheetahs in one of their best habitats, which is like the Masai Mara. I'm talking about free-ranging cheetahs. They don't occur at more than 1 per 100 square kilometers. If we just transport that logic back to Kuno National Park, it means you can only have about 6 or 7. Now, here's the big difference. Now, the action plan itself says if you do not have 20, if you look at all the simulations, if you do not have 20 and don't supplement them, this is going to run into extinction very quickly. Now, the action plan, according to many of us, has completely overestimated the carrying capacity that we call the number of cheetahs that that Kuno can harbor when you compare it with any other population in Africa. So the science point here is this: when there is so much literature available, and which all says free-ranging cheetahs occur at very low densities, why did we, in the first place, 10 years ago, it was estimated at 8 per 100 square kilometers, and now it's estimated at 3. And both are at least 4 times to even 12 times higher. Whereas, so the argument here is, when we have never seen anything like this outside, despite very high prey numbers, why is Kuno going to achieve this miracle in terms of the ecology? So this is where the science comes in. The simplest would have just simply been to see all the studies and revise and prepare an action plan according to what we already know, instead of just imagining something
Okay.
that has never been seen before. So that's the central point. So in
All
terms
right.
of
Ajay
these
Suri, would you
deaths,
like to respond to that? The fact, yeah. Yeah, Arjun Suri, would you like to respond to this? The fact that why would Kuno stand as an exception when we
Yeah.
haven't seen such cases being successful earlier?
I'll tell you what, I don't have the scientific competence to, argue on these points, which were just spoken. But I'll tell you something. I think we are trying to compare apples with pears. The human interface, the population dynamics of India is so very different from Africa. In Africa, you have spacely human populated areas, then you have huge, very huge sanctuaries, game reserves, national parks, and most of them in South Africa, they are fenced at the perimeter. So there is a segregation between animals and humans. Whereas in India, the situation is very different. Here you have most of our big species, whether they are tigers, leopards, elephants, they have been living in human proximity for ages. You have tigers which live in the sugarcane fields of Pilibhit. You have tigers, not one but more than 15 tigers which are living on the edge of Bhopal, which is the capital of Madhya Pradesh. And then you have leopards which are living in Mumbai. So the dynamics, human animal dynamics in India are very different. And the experts here, why they differ from the experts in South Africa is that they say that we have been managing the Indian wildlife, taking into consideration the animals' proximity with humans. And the dynamics of cheetahs in Africa is very different from what is going to happen in India, because sooner or later, when they are pushed out of the enclosure, they would come in contact with humans. They would come in contact with other kinds of prey. And like Dr. Arjun said earlier, the real test of these cheetahs will come once they are set out of the enclosure, and they have to fend on their own. That would be their real challenge. And I don't believe in the camp which says that just because 8 or 9 cheetahs have died, the experiment has failed. It has suffered a setback, no doubt about it. This radio collar thing was something which our scientists should have foreseen before. Septicemia caused by radio collars. So these were obviously these have been stumbling blocks, but eventually, I believe in the camp that for 1,000 years, India has been the home for cheetahs, and they would eventually adopt India as their new home, but it would, a lot more deaths would take place, mishaps would take place, and such television discussions also will take place.
But that's the unfortunate part, right? That unfortunately we have accepted the fact that there will be more deaths which will be expected, which will happen in the process. But also, let me get in Dr. Prayag. Dr. Prayag, there's also that whole discussion of relocating the remaining cheetahs to newer locations. Medically speaking, how much of that would impact the cheetah?
So I would stick to that. If the experts believe, the people believe that a new location will help, because I work with captive cheetahs, so I don't have authority on free-range cheetahs. So once the cheetahs started dying in our thing, they were shifted later on to rehab center. So I would rather stick on to my veterinary expertise. If the ecologists, if the biologists feel the whatever like the terms they use, carrying capacity, all these things, and prey base, all those things, if that is helpful for the survival of the species in other location, that should be considered. That's exactly the point when they told lion should be left in Kuno to save last time when there's outbreak of canine distemper virus. That was considered, but it didn't get implemented. I am for that. Scientifically speaking, that makes sense to me.
Okay. Ajay Suri,
if they want to continue the experiment.
Yeah, all right. Ajay Suri, the fact that the government has been suggested with the fact that the remaining cheetahs should be relocated, but it is insisting that, right now we should give it time and, relocation right now is not a consideration. But what's the problem in relocation if that helps?
I'll tell you what, I think Madhya Pradesh government has already earmarked 2 places where these cheetahs can be relocated. And, there is also some bit of politics here, because one place which has been in news of late is Mukundra Hill reserve in Rajasthan. But obviously, the government is different there, and there was some proposal to shift some of the cheetahs to Mukundra Hill, but I think that proposal was nipped in the bud. But this is something, this is an option which should always be there on the table, I believe, because keeping all the eggs in one basket may not be a very prudent step.
And so what's the way forward? Let's start with you, Ajay Suri, only, and then I'm going to go to my other panelists. What's the way forward now that, all of us are, all of you, in fact, as wildlife experts, have a consensus that this was something that does happen in the process of conserving and relocating and sustaining the cheetah in the wild. But now what's the way forward?
I think I've already answered my question. We have to accept the reality, and the reality is that, among the big cats, the survival rate is very, very low. During my years in wildlife observation and making films, I have seen so many tigresses in Corbett, Kanha, Ranthambore, who gave birth to 3-4 cubs, but eventually just one survived or 2 survives. The fatality rate among the big cats, it's something, and this is a part of the nature. In fact, I believe that this is done to maintain some kind of an ecological balance, and that's why one should not be too bugged by or too perturbed by these cheetahs' death. But yes, 9 cheetahs dying in last 10-11 months. This is a cause of concern, but I'm again repeating that this should not be seen as a doomsday scenario. This is not the end of the program for cheetah, and what we require is maybe a kind of course correction. For instance, if we find out that, if it's finally established that 2 of the cheetahs have died due to septicemia caused by the radio collars, then something should be done. And if we find that, Kuno is unable to hold so many cheetahs, then we should immediately, make arrangements at a second place, at a third place. We should, we should have a broader picture in mind. We should have at least 10-15 years scenario ahead of us, rather than trying to get a result in next 6 months or 8 months.
Okay. Arjun Gopalaswamy, for the limited knowledge that I have of the wildlife, I believe the total lifespan of a cheetah is about 10 to 12 years, and correct me if I'm wrong here. But if that is their lifespan, and that is the time that all of you say takes for a translocated cheetah to adjust and grow and, the species to spread, what do we expect here then?
That's not too much a concern about the actual lifespan of the cheetah. But I think where the review must happen now is this assumption that Project Cheetah means bringing cheetahs right at the first step is, I think, a little flawed. I don't think the name Project Cheetah means you bring the cheetahs right from the beginning, and then even when the preparations aren't adequate, you just keep waiting. A lot will die in the process, but we just keep bringing them. No, I would rather take a safer approach. Let the name Project Cheetah remain. We don't need to import any more cheetahs for the moment. And then we will ensure what we know about cheetah ecology is available for them in India as well. We are bringing these African cheetahs, and we know a lot about their ecology, their population ecology, their spatial ecology. And why don't we use all that knowledge instead of saying this is completely new, this is something that has never been done before, and let's just ignore all those studies and then just simply come up with a plan. So because already we have seen the action plan itself has assumed 20 cheetahs. Now that has just come out of nowhere because these are not fenced populations, these are free-ranging populations. So I think the first step is to just go back to the drawing board and then first see what cheetahs really need, make sure they are all available, all in the name of Project Cheetah. I don't think we physically need to translocate all of them at the moment. And then maybe 10 years later, when things are all, when we really think things are ready for them, they can be moved.
Okay. Okay. Okay, last quick comments by Dr. Prayag as well. Dr. Prayag, what's the way forward according to you as a vet? How do you see this panning out?
For me, since they have told the experiment, they can continue the experiment till they realize this experiment didn't work. Because being in the government, I don't have the authority to tell continue or not continue. But my experience working with cheetahs in captivity at least made me realize that learn from the mistake. That's why I was quoting that book my boss gave me, Our Iceberg is Melting. All I can tell is that iceberg is melting. Definitely it will take a time for people to realize what I mean, because I have taken permission from government to speak on behalf of this one. So my thing is, if you experiment, carry on till you want to carry on. For me, it's very clear. I've learned from my captive experience. I don't want to put that into this one because you never know. As Arjun told, this is the first time they're doing in the free-ranging thing. No one has a clue about it. It's just like a speculation experiment. But it's a very costly experiment for me.
Yeah. All right, we'll wrap it up here. Arjun Gopalaswamy, Ajay Suri and Dr. Prayag HS. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us tonight and sharing your perspective in helping us understand the situation of the cheetah conservation that India is going through. Thank you very much. And now let's move on. I am